Hello and welcome to American English Live Series 22, episode number 4. We are so happy that each of you are here with us today. My name is Dr. Darlene Wiggins-Dockery, and I'll be with you today along with our moderator behind the scene, Elena, who will be responding to your questions and your comments during the webinar. We wanted to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and available on various platforms. By attending and adding your comments in the chat or the comments box during the webinar, your name, your country, or your comment may be included in the video recording. By participating, you consent to your comments being shared in the recording and its use for the purposes related to the work of FHI 360 and the U.S. Department of State. Throughout Series 22, we are exploring a variety of strategies for fostering student motivation and engagement in the English language classroom. We hope you'll be able to use the strategies that we share. So here's what you can expect today. The webinar will be about 60 minutes long. The presenter will present the materials, and I, as your host, will be asking questions and responding to the material, but mainly we want to share your ideas. We want to know what you think, and we want to know your questions. So please share your thoughts using the comments feature or the chat box. At the end of today's webinar, there'll be a short quiz, and that is your chance to earn a digital badge. More details about that will be coming up at the end of the session. Now for today's webinar, managing and engaging large classes with long-term teams. Dividing a large class into teams that last the entire term can lessen the teacher's workload, promote communicative language teaching and learning, and foster student engagement and a sense of community. So in each session, we'll define these terms, describe what the teams do, and how they benefit both the class and the teacher, and address some management issues. And we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. Kitty Barnhouse Purgason. Kitty is Professor Emerita of TESOL at Biola University in Los Angeles, California, specializing in language teaching methodology. She has a PhD in applied linguistics from UCLA. She has lived, studied, served, or taught in India, Russia, Korea, China, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Mauritania, Indonesia, Kuwait, Oman, Vietnam, Spain, Qatar, and Tajikistan. She is a 3-time Fulbright Fellow and is also a U.S. Department of State English language specialist. We are very pleased to have Dr. Purgason with us today. Welcome, Kitty.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Hearing you mention all those countries reminds me of how thankful I am for my experiences in each place. I've learned so much from people around the world, and I'm happy to be with teachers from so many places in today's webinar about managing and engaging large classes with long-term teams. So here's the plan for our time together. First of all, I'll be defining long-term teams and describing how they can help us with both classroom management and student engagement. Second, I'll give some examples of learning activities done with students in teams. And finally, I'll look at potential issues or problems and suggest solutions. The very first English language classes I taught had 60 to 70 students in them. Not as many as in this photo, but enough to overwhelm me. So for a long time, I've been interested in how teachers can be supported in such situations. I want to talk about the challenges of large classes. But first of all, how large is large? In a primary school, having 30 students in a class would be considered large. As I mentioned, I've taught classes of 60 to 70 university students, and I've heard of classes as large as 150. Whatever the numbers, with so many in our class, it's hard to connect to students as individual human beings. It's hard to engage and motivate students. They're more likely to just sit passively in class or not even come to class or behave badly in class. In a large class, we teachers may talk too much, even though we know it's better to get students to talk if they're really going to learn English. And it's hard to make that happen productively in a large class. And large classes definitely create a lot of administrative work for teachers. But we want to hear from you. If you teach or have learned in a large class, what are the challenges you've experienced? Specifically, how is it challenging to manage such classes and to engage students when there are so many of them?
Oh, we are really looking forward to hearing from you because we know a lot of you do have really large classes. So, how is it challenging to manage and engage these large classes? So, this is a topic that we know that you will immediately be able to put to use. Um, we have a response from Nabil Kitty, and she says that my typical class has 60 students. Then Joelma said that in response to the question, how is it challenging to manage and engage large classes? One of the challenges is different levels of English proficiency. Namakando said it's challenging to know their needs. Sharita said students tend to be talkative. My guess is talkative not about what you want them to talk about as the teacher. And then we heard from Mansour, who said it demands a lot of patience and resilience to teach in large classes. Michael said classroom management, maintaining discipline and ensuring participation from all students can be challenging. Ong said very challenging, unequal abilities, and different backgrounds. And then we heard from Mabua, who said disorganized classes with students with different levels and also, again, talkative ones. So those are some of the responses we've received. Kitty, back to you.
Well, as you have just said, large classes are a reality for many of you, and they create many challenges. One solution is what we're discussing today, grouping our students into teams that last throughout the semester or term. Some people call these standing teams. These aren't groups that you put students in for one activity or one class session or even one project. Each team is like a mini class for the whole term. What should we call these groups? There are several different names. You might be familiar with the house system that some schools have. In some fields, these groups are called a squad, and some businesses use the term pod. I'm calling these groups teams, but you might choose another name. As you think about your own classes, use the label that's best for your teaching context. Well, how many people should be in a team? This diagram shows a class of 60 divided into 6 teams of 10. Here are some other examples of class divisions. The number of students in a team and the number of teams in a class depends on what works for your classroom. How many students do you have? What is the seating in your classroom? Another question is how to group students into teams. And the answer depends on whether you know your students before the term begins or not. It also depends on how much time you have. Some teachers are too busy to look over the class list and make a lot of detailed decisions about who goes in which team. A good general principle is that mixed proficiency is best. You'll see from the examples later in our webinar that there is room for both low and high level students within a team. In addition, you know your context best. For example, you know whether boys and girls should be in mixed or separate teams. You know whether there are social or language divisions that could be overcome by having students from different backgrounds in the same team. Each team has a leader, and the leader is the student who interacts the most with the teacher. How do you choose a leader? They may be decided by the teacher or selected by the school. And who should the leader be? The leader doesn't have to be the best at English, just a responsible student, and a student that most people will respect and get along with. This leads to the question of when to establish the teams. Again, the answer is it depends. If you know your students, I would put them in teams from the first day. If you don't know them, it may be helpful to wait a week or two so you can make good decisions about grouping and leaders. It's good for long-term teams to have an identity, something that makes them who they are. At the minimum, each team sits together. The seating should be so they can interact, as our diagrams show. They also need a name because you'll be calling on them as a team. In addition, depending on the age and interests of your students, a team might choose a color, they might design a flag, or have a mascot. Well, what about your classes? Based on your class size, how many teams of how many students each would you create?
I know you're already thinking about this, so I'm looking forward to getting your responses to how you would divide your students into teams. While we're waiting, Kitty, we have some comments. Jessam said, "These are questions." Thanks, Kitty. I'm waiting for a long time for this session. So Jasmine is looking forward to getting some tips. Then we heard from Manuel, who said, "I usually group students with mixed levels of English proficiency."
Mhm.
So that is a tip that Manuel is already implementing. Then we, in response to your prompt here, based on your class size, how many teams of how many students each would you create? Joelma said, "My classes of 40 learners, there are 8 groups of 5 each." And then Sharita said 8 groups of 6 students based on that class. And then Manuel said they can choose names for their teams. This is a comment. Manuel thinks that's great. And then Mohammed said 4 or 5 teams for his class. Nabil said 6 teams, 10 students each. And then Toomey said mixed ability teams of 6. Rita said 10 teams of 5 students per team. These are some big classes, aren't they? They're in the right place. Back to you, Kitty.
Well, I'm so glad you're applying what I've said to your class. And remember, these are teams that last the whole term. Well, let's get on to what teams can do. We're going to look at 7 benefits of teams. That is, 7 things teams can do to help make life easier for teachers and students. And they're related to class management, goals, community, engagement, responsibility, personal attention to students, and effective language learning. First, there are a lot of classroom management tasks that can be taken off the teacher's shoulders and done within teams by the team. For example, each team leader can take attendance and check homework for the students within their team. The teacher doesn't have to call out 60 names or look at 60 pieces of paper. Team leaders can also distribute materials. In a crowded room where the teacher can't move to the middle or back, the team leaders can be the ones to make sure everyone in the team is paying attention, staying on task, and not making a lot of noise. For accountability and record keeping, the leader can turn in a report or summary at the end of class. Secondly, teams can also help students be aware of and meet both daily outcomes and long-term goals. For example, on this day, the outcome for a problem solution activity is that students will use would to talk about future results. Another goal is having all students participate in the group discussion. A team report for the day, which will be turned into the teacher, keeps students accountable for those outcomes. Large classes aren't only difficult for teachers, they can also result in students feeling lost and lonely. But in a team, students can get to know each other and feel a sense of community. They know someone cares if they're absent and will help them learn if they're struggling. Student engagement is enhanced by a lot of things, including the sense of community I just mentioned. But engagement in learning can also be pushed by occasional competition between teams. For example, when there's a team competition for who has the best attendance, classmates encourage each other to be present. When there's a competition for which team is quickly doing the task the teacher has set, students are motivated to get involved. Many kinds of engagement can be boosted with team points. Engagement can also be boosted when students are given more responsibility. And that also helps the activities go smoothly. Here are some roles students might be assigned to within their teams for a given activity. The manager is the one who makes sure everyone is on task for the activity. The timekeeper lets the team know if they need to move faster to finish the activity on time or move to the next section of an activity. A secretary writes down team ideas or answers. A reporter speaks for the team to the whole class. A language monitor makes sure everyone is using English if that's important for the activity, or listens for target language such as correct use of past tense. A materials person can distribute handouts or other supplies. Which role is needed will depend on the activity and may vary from day to day. And you may add other roles like a noise monitor to keep students from being too crazy and noisy. We'll see some examples later on. One of the biggest challenges in large classes is that teachers don't have much personal interaction with students. When the class is divided into teams, however, while the rest of the class is doing independent work, the teacher can approach a team and give that group personal attention. It's easier for teachers to keep track of which students they've listened to this way. Ideally, we can interact with each team at least once during a term. Otherwise, we usually just talk with students in the front row, right? Finally, using long-term teams means we can have good communicative language teaching. Instead of the teacher being at the center, the students are actively participating in learning. Instead of just paper and pencil exercises, students will use English. Instead of just reading, writing, and listening, students will be speaking. All our students will learn English better in this way. I'm going to talk more about this with some examples later on, but before I do that, I want to hear from you. Which of these benefits of using long-term teams is most important to you, and why?
Okay, so you see the benefits listed there. What do you think? Which is most important to you? I'm looking forward to your responses. While the responses are coming in, Kitty, I have some comments for you. Alfara says, it's important to have a leader, but it is also a good thing to assign roles within the group so that everyone feels committed and responsible. So Alfara agrees with you. And then we have Mansour, who says, thanks for these great tips. Jackie says, I like the idea of giving students responsibility. Thanks. And so now we have some responses to which of these are most important to you and why. Owale says, giving learners activities is good for active engagement. So I think that would be most important to Owale. Christian says, increase engagement. Then we heard from Rashida, who said, managing the class, because it is the most challenging thing in my experience. Lehan said, focus students on goals. And then we heard from Dr. Arshad, who said, all are important. Elena said, all these points are really important. Building connection through building community is vital. So those are responses we've received. Thank you for your participation. And back to you, Kitty.
Well, thank you for really thinking about those things that teams can do. Now, I want to go on to talk about some specific examples of class activities that facilitate communicative teaching and good learning, and that can be done in teams. The first one I want to share involves pairs of students talking with each other. That's followed by a report phase, first in teams and then to the whole class. During the first step, within their teams, pairs of students talk to each other. In response to a prompt, they may be answering questions or sharing opinions. As I said earlier, giving students roles helps activities within teams go smoothly. During step 1 of this activity, one important student role is the manager. This person puts students in pairs and makes sure they know what to do. If there are several options in this step, a student timekeeper can also be helpful. As far as what the teachers do while teams are talking, they can walk around and listen. I usually like to take notes for future feedback. Step 2 involves the report. The manager brings the team together to hear a report from the pairs. The manager asks students to talk about their partners. So now students are using verbs with he and she. During this step, another student role is secretary. This person takes notes on what each team member has said. And if there's time, step 2 can be expanded to include the secretary talking to the team about their notes. They can summarize the team's answers. And then step 3, the teacher ends the activity by calling on a few teams to report their answers to the class. During this step, the student with the role of reporter is the one who talks if the teacher calls on their team. Let's look at an example. The teaching point is expressing likes and dislikes. There are 2 questions and several categories that students can talk about, such as fruit, sports, music, etc. During step 1, students are saying things like, I like blue, or I don't like swimming. During step 2, as pairs report to the team, they say things like, Sarah likes green, or Atu doesn't like swimming. The secretary can sum up team responses by saying things like, most of us like red, right? Or all of us like football. And finally, in step 3, if the teacher calls on their team, the reporter will say, a few of us like green, one person likes yellow, and so on. Well, let me give you a few practical tips to make this activity go smoothly. Let's not forget to scaffold team activities with whole class instruction beforehand. We have to prepare students and give them support before they're able to work on their own. One way would be to do choral listen and repeat, or a substitution drill. That can work even in the largest class. And it prepares and orients the students as to what they'll be doing later in pairs within their team. Secondly, notice that there are 7 topics for the students to talk about. We want to prepare enough items that the activity will continue for at least 10 or 15 minutes. Slower teams may only talk about the first ones, fruit, sports, and music, while faster teams may talk about them all. This may also be a way for the teacher to give students choices. You can ask teams to choose 5 out of the 7 to talk about. Tip number 3, when a team is reporting, it can be tempting for the rest of the class to not pay attention and chatter among themselves. But one way to encourage listening is to have a surprise bonus step. In this example, the teacher calls on a team and asks for a comparison. Who can make a sentence comparing your team with the Eagles team? Here, the team can choose anyone, perhaps their best student, to respond. In our team, most people like red, but in the Eagles team, most people like blue. Finally, How do you designate which student will do which roles during an activity? The easiest way is to randomly assign them via the students' numbers within their team and to put assignments on the board. In this example, we see that the manager for this day's activity is the number 5 student. A timekeeper is the number 2 student, and so on. Here are a few other examples for teaching points and topics that would work with the activity pair, talk, and report. Tell us a funny story about when you were younger. Talk about an ability you wish you had. Who do you admire and why? What's the best solution to such and such a problem? As you choose your materials, make sure the activity aligns with your objectives or outcomes. If your textbook has talk in pairs activities, you can adapt them for teams. Well, what do you think? Is there a lesson in your curriculum or textbook where you could try pair, talk, and report in teams?
Okay, so is there a lesson that you could pair, that you could use this activity with? What is a lesson in your curriculum when you could try this activity in teams? We know you're thinking, so let's see what your responses are. Kitty, while they're coming in, we heard from Lucas, who said a very useful topic for our context with large classes here in my country. So Lucas appreciates this presentation. Then we heard from people who love these ideas. Tumi said, wow. Oyan says, good idea. Alize says, amazing. Wahiba says, extremely encouraging activities. Thank you. And then we have a question. Saul asked, should they take turns on the roles, especially since these are going to be long-term teams?
I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking so I can clarify. The roles are for activities, and the teams are for the whole semester. So each day that you do one of these activities, you can assign different roles to different students.
Thank you for that, Kitty, and thank you for your question. Um, Now we have some responses to what is a lesson in your curriculum when you could try this activity in teams. Hatchery says, I like this one. It should be great with young learners. Then we heard from Joma, who said, almost every lesson, I think I could use pair talk. Mohammed said, all lessons, we try this activity in teams. It happens all around the session. And then Hawaki said, food and meal lesson. Nabil said, I would try it with my Access students this Saturday. Hello, Access teachers. And then we heard from Mansour, who said, while dealing with civic engagement lessons. And then Ewan said, speaking, point at the pictures and say. And then Manuel said, when talking about food and hobbies. So those are the responses we have received, or some of them. And thank you for your responses and for your engagement. Back to you, Kitty.
It's great to hear from you. And I want to go on to another sample activity and give you a few more ideas. This is when the teacher stands up front and asks the class questions. You know, when we ask a question, in some classes, there are students who shout out the answer and the other students just sit there and are left behind. But in other classes, no one raises their hand first. Eventually, one of the best students, the one who always answers, says something. or we answer the question ourselves. But none of those situations is desirable for learning or engagement. So I want to give an alternative. The teacher can use teams in several different ways to get all the students engaged during a question and answer activity. On the spot, talk and be ready, and going deeper. They're all done in slightly different ways, depending on different types of questions. Let's look at each three in detail. For our examples, let's imagine that the class has read the story, Tom Sawyer Paints the Fence. Here are 6 questions. Some are easy, like number 1, who wrote this story? Some are a little more difficult, like number 2, why does Tom have to paint the fence? Others, like number 6, what kind of person is Tom? Require more critical thinking and advanced vocabulary in English. Well, when questions are easy, like who wrote this story, the teacher can try a technique I call on the spot. They ask the question, randomly name a team and a student number, and expect a quick answer. So if orange team student number 4 gives the right answer, their whole team gets a point. But by the way, it's better if you can call a student by name instead of number 4, but realistically, in some really large classes, that's hard to do, especially at the start of the term. Well, a harder question like, why does Tom have to paint the fence? Means it might be time for the technique I call talk and be ready. The team has time to discuss the answer. Not very much time, maybe 30 seconds. They know anyone in their team can be randomly called on, so more capable students try to ensure that all their teammates know the answer. Oh, he was naughty. Tom skipped school to go swimming. Tom stole jam from Aunt Polly, like that. The question, what kind of person is Tom, is an example of a question that requires critical thinking and stronger language skills. Students need to come up with answers like resourceful, clever, witty, imaginative. And in this technique, which I call going deeper, a team who has a relevant word that no other group has thought of can get extra points. As we saw, these 3 variations, on the spot, talk and be ready, and going deeper, are suitable for different types of questions, easy, medium, and difficult. This chart summarizes how the teacher asks the question and how the team works. I want to go on and give you some tips for doing whole class Q&A with your class in teams. Whole class question and answer in teams definitely requires good logistics. I like to plan in advance which group and which number I'm going to call on and put that in my lesson plan. For example, my plan here shows I'm going to use on the spot for questions 1 and 2. I'll call on the orange team, student number 4 for question number 1, and the yellow team, student number 7 for question number 2. I deliberately spread the questions around to different teams and students. Having all this in my plan means I can focus on students while I'm teaching. If you decide to use points to keep students engaged, It can be really complicated to keep track of them all and ask the questions at the same time. So I suggest using a student helper. The student helper notes the points that teams get during the activity, and the teacher can then focus on questions and answers. Having a student helper also helps you keep the pace of the questions fast. That's important to keep students engaged. There's nothing worse than spending half an hour on just a few questions. Finally, as with any format or new activity, students will need time to get used to it. Don't give up if it seems rough at first. Keep training students as to your expectations, how much time they have to think, how they answer, how you'll call on them, how their team will get points. It will take several tries, but the benefit of successful teamwork is worth the time. These kinds of variations on whole class question and answer, on the spot, talk and be ready, and going deeper, can be used for several purposes. One is reading comprehension, as I just showed you. If you teach content such as history or science or civic engagement, they're great for review. And they can also be used for grammar exercises and homework checking. I'd love to hear from you. How could you try these ideas for team-based whole class question and answer in your class?
So we want to hear from you. How could you try these ideas for a team-based whole class Q&A in your class? While we're waiting for those responses, Kitty, we have some comments. McGarty says about going deeper, I think, wow, I'm working with documentaries as a genre. This activity would fit greatly. And then another wow. Then we heard from Avril, who said, again, wow, differentiated open questions. They work much better than traditional strategies. And then we heard from Alize, who said, wonderful ideas, and I'm indebted to you to deliver these ideas to us, for delivering these ideas to us. And then we have a response to how could you try these ideas for team-based whole class Q&A in your class. And we heard from Patchery, who said, I'd use this in my classroom, having a student helper and mark points on a corner of my whiteboard. Sultana said, it is an important idea for any teacher in class. Then we heard from Caroline, who said, in a grammar lesson, finding errors in the sentence. Graciela said, I try to have them respond, each one into the group, and then report one by one in turn. And we have another response from Manuel, who said, I'd try going deeper activities. Regine Kant said, making circles and doing role plays is how they would try these ideas. Saeed said, asking them parts of the city we can visit and those we have here. Betty said, I want to try them in my virtual classes as well. I normally send them to work in breakout rooms. So those are some of the responses that we have received. One last response just came in, Danielle said making students draw and collage their questions and making them explain. Some more popping in now. Angel said, thanks is a great way to start a new unit. And Javed is said, the point of all this is to involve everyone effectively. This is great. Back to you, Kitty.
Exactly. We want to involve everyone. Well, before we end, let me talk about a few practical issues teachers might have using long-term teams. Sometimes teachers worry about individual responsibility. What would prevent the strongest student in a team from doing the work for everyone? One way to make sure all students are participating is to randomly call on individuals, as we've seen, Eagles team number 6 or blue team number 2. And a teacher can also ask the team leader to turn in written work for individuals. For example, team leaders, today, please turn in homework for the number 4 student in your team. Note that also means that you're not looking at 100 pieces of homework, just selected homework. The second way is through your grading. Over the course of the term, you might have 60% of the final grade be individual test scores and 40% be team points, or some other variation that works with your school policy, your workload, and the best way to motivate your students. A related issue is that there are some students who like to do it all. They take over everything in the group. And the best solution is with role assignments for a given activity. For example, if the most talkative student has to be the secretary during one of your activities, they will be quieter. And if a shy but capable student is the manager, they'll naturally speak up and take a leadership role, at least during that activity. Team dynamics can also be a problem. Students may not be used to teams and may not really get invested. Students might not like each other or get along with each other. Team leaders may not be doing a good job. Well, I wish we had time to get into detail on all these solutions. But briefly, let me say, a team approach to large classes takes time. It won't be perfect during the first week or 2 or 3. Remember, you've got the whole term. Second, continue to make your expectations clear for each role and each activity. Third, allow students a chance to give you anonymous feedback about their particular team and what they like or not. And finally, remind students that in real life, we often have to work with people we don't enjoy or wouldn't choose. Class teams are a good preparation for real life. A fourth practical issue is that working in teams can become a bit stale over the course of the term. It's like any activity or system we implement in class. It has to stay fresh. To add some spice to your class, you might try something new each week. It could be a team competition. For example, which team is in their seats on time? Or which team has the fewest violations of cell phone rules? It could be a team responsibility. For example, your team has to bring in an example of English in real life. Or your team has to create a meme to teach a vocabulary item. Well, Which of these issues, or maybe some other issues with teams, have you experienced in your classroom? How did you overcome them?
So, for those of you who have already tried working with teams, we want your wisdom. How did you overcome the challenges, some of the challenges that Kitty just mentioned in working with your teams? Let's see what your responses are. We're looking for your feedback. And while that's coming in, I want to share a couple of comments. Ahmed said, this approach makes the students centered, not teacher centered. Martha said, I love this topic and techniques. It works for all classes, whether small or large. And then Nabil said, I will definitely try it with my Access students. Excited. And so now, in response to which of these issues or any other issues with teams have you experienced in your classroom and how did you overcome them? We heard from Javed, who said, it is difficult at the primary level to keep the teams. Irfan said, feedback and assessment is crucial. Mansour said, competition can make it better. Lena said, all of these issues. So those are some of the responses we've received. Here's some more coming in. Caroline said, the main issue is that most of the members don't work. Then she put ha ha ha, because they believe that the leader can do it by himself. Elena said, we encourage students to unite into a team according to the student's interest. Lena said, usually the talkative students, let them be the managers or leaders of the group. And then Betty said, there is always someone who knows it all and wants to monopolize the work. So those are some of the challenges that our participants have shared with us. Back to you, Kitty.
It is true. There are challenges with people who take over the team or leaders who want to do it all. And that's why we not only have a team leader to do things like take attendance in the team and manage the homework for the team, but also for an activity on a given day, you have the roles. So there is a manager for an activity, and that person is not necessarily the team leader. They're the manager for that activity. I hope that enables you to spread out the responsibilities among all of your students. Well, we are close to the end of our session. We've talked about how long-term teams can meet challenges of classroom management and student engagement. We've looked at 2 examples of class activities that can be done in teams. And we've examined potential issues with an eye to helping teachers be successful in implementing teams. I hope you'll take a few minutes after this webinar to reflect on your own classroom and make a plan to implement long-term teams. How many teams will you have? How will you introduce the idea of teams to your students? What classroom work will you have teams do that will help reduce your management load? What learning activities for teams will you try? Here are some other resources related to teaching in large classes. It was wonderful to be with you today. And I look forward to interacting more on the AE Live Facebook page in the next few days. If you have questions that I wasn't able to answer, please ask them in the next couple of days on the American English Live Facebook page. I'll be there.
Thank you so much, Kitty, for describing how and why we need to divide large classes into long-term teams